What would make a lifelong Republican or Democrat completely give up on their party and just walk away? Well, that's what I did. It was the morning after the guy I voted for lost the presidential election, not this current one that just happened. This is a long time ago. I was so mad. I was so upset, and I was complaining to a good friend of mine who happened to have voted for the guy who won, how upset I was and how mad I was and how this guy was going to destroy everything and ruin everything, until she finally cuts me off and says, "Brad, you can't do that. You can't do that. He just got elected. You got to give him a chance. He just got elected." But that's just it. I didn't want him to have a chance. I didn't want him to have the opportunity to implement policies that I firmly disagreed with, things that were diametrically opposed to the core of my being. But after reflecting on what she said, it occurred to me that as a Christian, I'm not really called to complain and to bicker and to argue. If anything, I'm called to pray for our country, for our leaders. So that's what I resolved to do. I resolved to pray for this man as president, as leader, as long as he was the president, and not to go online and complain and argue with people. And even though there were some times that I completely failed at the complaining part, I would completely go off the rails on social media, and I made a lot of my friends mad. But for the entire 8 years that he was president, I prayed for him every single day. And after praying so much, it occurred to me that so much of my life was focused on, so much of all of our lives was focused on people in Washington, D.C. and what people in Washington, D.C. were doing. Wherever I was and no matter what I was doing, I was focused through social media, through cable news, through talk radio, even the books I was reading. I was focused on people in Washington, D.C. All of this attention, looking to Washington, fostering a hope, a future hope. And this is where my perspective really started to change, because it's a future hope that I necessarily couldn't articulate or couldn't explain what it was or what it would look like. Like, what is this obsession of mine? What is the end of it? Where is this going? So for the first time, I resolved to not look into the future for a hope that may or may not ever be fulfilled, but instead to look into the past to see if there was anything in the past that might give hope. And I don't mean all the way back to the founding fathers. Obviously, they established an ideal that we're all aspiring to. But I mean in the more recent past, like within my lifetime or my parents' lifetime. Is there a more recent presidential election that would serve as some kind of indication that there is hope for the future, like there's a momentum that is moving us in a particular direction? So here's the thought experiment. Looking into the past at the presidential elections, the winners and the losers from both parties, hindsight is 2020. We know now what they stood for, what they did, not what they promised to do, not the ideology that they set forth, but actually what they did. And with that information, looking backwards, is there any candidate that we would now today vote for in hindsight? And really, I could only really think of one, and I couldn't even vote for him because I was a little kid at the time, which this was very shocking to me because, again, Washington, D.C. consumed my life. Everything I was doing all of the time was focused on Washington, D.C. And to look back and to see that there's only one individual in my lifetime that I would have voted for, including people I did vote for, I would not vote for again. People I had voted for, I could not think of one single person I've ever voted for, except maybe a local representative, that I would actually vote for again. Not to say that I would have voted for their opponent, because you see, as long as they have that argument that we're voting for the lesser of two evils, then they win and we lose. So I did something that I hadn't been able to do for 20 years. I turned it all off. In 2009, I called up the cable company and we had the cable cut off. In the car, I kept the radio off, and for the last 10 years when I'm driving in silence, usually praying the rosary. And an amazing thing happened during this period of time. My spiritual life began to really grow because when I took my focus off of Washington, D.C., I was able to put my focus on God. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not saying that we just need to check out. We need to be good citizens. We need to stay informed. We need to vote. We need to pray for our country, especially in regards to pro-life issues. But what most of us are doing is well beyond that. We've completely surrendered our humanity to politicians and to political parties that we believe are going to fix everything. And therefore, we've neglected completely the development of our interior character. We don't know how to discuss policy or issues. All we know how to do is to spew talking points. And when our opponents reject those talking points, as they surely will, we don't have the interior character to handle it. So all we do is just cuss them out. In vain hope that McCain or Kerry or Romney or Dole or Dukakis or Mondale would have won and would have passed a law that would have made all men good and moral. We have neglected what truly does make men good and moral. We don't grow in virtue by winning elections and political victories. We grow in virtue by practicing virtue. Each and every one of us practicing virtue to grow in virtue. This little green book was a great starting point for me. It's called My Way of Life, the Summa Simplified for Everyone by a Dominican named Walter Farrell. I'll link it in the description. But in this little section right here, just this little section I have bookmarked, I'm not even speaking about the supernatural virtues. I'm speaking just about the cardinal virtues of prudence, fortitude, justice, and temperance on pages 365 to 439. So we're like 60-something pages in this little book. He explains what these virtues are, what their sub-virtues are, and what their corresponding vices are. And this for me was it was like the next step after breaking my obsession with Washington, D.C. and the Republicans and the Democrats. Studying the virtues and praying for the virtues and practicing the virtues within the context of a daily examination of conscience and a regular confession. So the virtues that you're actively struggling with, not the virtues that you prefer to work on, but the ones that you need to work on. This is how you develop good moral character. Click on the link in the description and get this book. Learn about virtue, pray for virtue, practice virtue, and then let me know in the comments in a couple weeks how it's going. It was Taco Tuesday, so I stopped at the grocery store to pick up a couple of things. But while I was checking out, apparently the lady at that register over there, apparently she was having a really difficult time because as I'm standing there, I hear, did she just say that?